All right. Our final guest this evening is a writer, hospital chaplain, and social worker living in Chicago. He holds graduate degrees from the University of Chicago and McCormick Theological Seminary, where he serves as an adjunct professor in ministry. His writing has appeared in Sojourners, Slanted, and Inheritance magazines. And his creative nonfiction was nominated for a 2019 Pushcart Prize by the Asian American Writers Workshop. He is the author of a booklet of uncommon prayer, collects for the Black Lives Matter movement and beyond. Find him online at A Fresh Mind or Nurturing a Green Thumb and his church's food garden in Hyde Park. Please put your hands together for Kenji Kuramitsu.
Thank you. Thank you, Eden and Andrew, for the invitation to be here tonight. Shout outs to Miriam, Meg, Brianna, and Sarah for coming, friends and peers. And thank you for your attention at the end of a long evening. This piece is called Carrying the Fire in the Windy City. The longer version of it is online at Asian American Writers Workshop, but I'll just share a shorter version today. Let me also just say this is the first time I've used an iPad at something like this. And I'm a little trepidatious. I was at a wedding last year in which the Reverend was using an iPad as she was conducting the ceremony, and a few minutes into her sermon, she paused and just said, "I've lost everything." And we were sitting there like, what do you do when that happens? It all worked out fine. Anyway, so Carrying the Fire in the Windy City. Before the war, very few Japanese in diaspora called Chicago home. As things wound down and as the government began to shut down the 10 major concentration camps and the fate of the 120,000 people caged therein, authorities began to see Chicago as an ideal location for resettlement and relocation. A city where former incarcerees could join assimilationist social institutions and dissolve into white Americana, shedding their Japanese-ness. Manzanar, Minidoka, Hart Mountain, Poston, Tule Lake, Gila River, Granada, Topaz, Jerome, and Rohr. From such places, from such names, we came and arrived in this city where the wind coming off the lake snatched our breath. When our families arrived in Chicago, they did not know the conditions of this new climate, nor the purpose their bodies would serve in this city's carefully segregated ecosystem. We were not so much an apex predator as a buffer species, alien elements delicately introduced into the petri dish of a city long racked with redlining and restrictive covenants. My grandparents arrived here post-war, joining the thousands of Japanese Americans who came to this city after camp. My dad and his parents were resettled into the Hyde Park neighborhood, or rather moved in with my grandmother's siblings who were resettled there, one of the few neighborhoods where they could find rent. My grandfather was offered a position as a director of a YMCA summer camp located in West Michigan. Camp Channing, the name of this facility, was seeking to desegregate its youth programs and sought guidance from this former outdoors person with an Asian face in their quest to introduce Black and Puerto Rican youth to the wonders of the great outdoors. My grandfather in this role would recruit young people of color to come to camp. 40 years before my family's migration, 5 Black youth from the south side of Chicago met for a day of adventure and play. On a thick July afternoon in 1919, 100 years ago this month, Chicago sweltered. Thousands of city dwellers flocked to Lake Michigan, seeking refuge from the oppressive heat in the rolling waves. And in a special spot on the lakefront called Hot and Cold, so named for the chilled waters that came off of a soda facility nearby, the boys set off onto the lake in an improvised raft. Maybe the youth didn't notice as they began to drift away from the neutral zone and towards the whites-only beach area, where a white man lounging in the sands became incensed, spotting the group and began hurling heavy stones. One of these stones we know found its target in 14-year-old Eugene Williams, who was swimming alongside his friends when he was hit and sunk beneath the waves. When Eugene's murderer was identified to police, a white officer refused to arrest the killer, instead confronting Black protesters. The crowd surged and the police flailed, Someone fired a revolver, and just like that, the inferno had begun, a second great Chicago fire. The resulting riots, 100 years ago this month, in which the city's white residents systemically hunted, scorched, and destroyed black life throughout the metropolis, secured Chicago's place in the wave of racist terror known as the Red Summer. Harlem Renaissance writer and later Chicago resident Claude McKay would dedicate his best-known poem to this scarlet saga. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. While my grandpa worked at camp, my grandmother Tsuyoko began teaching at an elementary school in Woodlawn. A neighborhood just 4 years before her work there had convulsed when a 14-year-old boy from down the street named Emmett Till was disappeared while spending the summer with relatives in Money, Mississippi. Till's body was discovered by children who, just like Eugene and his friends, went to the waters to play on a hot summer day. And Till's killing and his murderer's acquittal made international news. The Staple Singers recount this in their civil rights ballad, Freedom Highway. Found dead people in the forests, Tallahatchie rivers and lakes. The whole world is wondering what's wrong with the United States. It's often observed that Emmett was a city flower, bloomed in an urban north, far from the brimming volume of racial codes into which black Southerners were pressed with daily violence. And yet social contracts existed across both North and South, bounding the access of African Americans to nature. From the segregation of public parks and swimming areas against the contamination of black flesh, to the morphing of wilderness spaces into sites of cruel spectacle under lynching. Black access to outdoor leisure has consistently been constrained in our society under the gaze of white surveillance. Eugene and Emmett were both murdered at sites of historic waterfront play. Black girls are today plucked from swimming pools and brutalized by police. Have you gone camping recently? Played golf? Visited REI? From Chicago to Mar-a-Lago, whiteness still claims most areas of outdoor play and recreation, chanting its own version of a Twisted Camp song. This land is my land, this land is our land, and it has always been our land, and we can treat it as we please, and we can do the damn well same to you. When I was a child, the tales of Camp Channing would stumble out on quiet car rides with my dad, and the stories of the fires were my favorite. My dad remembers how the staff used to dress up as Native Americans for these gatherings, wearing fake costumes and shouting made-up words. I was mesmerized as a kid as I pictured what these grand campfires must have been like, bronze faces crowded around a circle, lit green by whistling flames. I could hear the sing-alongs, taste the thick smoke drifting over my clothes and hanging in my dark hair for days. At family parties, talk of camp would also, of course, emerge once the children had tottered off. Once bellies were filled and cups rimmed with warm froth, camp nearly always appeared. Camp was a damn lie, an uncle says. They told us we were there for our own protection, so why were the machine guns always pointed inside the fences? An aunt nods. Camp was very hard for my mother, she says. I was born there with no father, and I barely remember it at all. I still feel so alone. A friend that we call Uncle raises his voice. My dad drank himself to death after he got out of camp. He never got over what it did to him. Of course, the stories begin to blend in your young mind. Camp is where your dad learned to swim, where your grandmother received letters from her brothers that arrived with every other word blacked out. At camp, you pledge allegiance to the flag, you tell tall tales and sing silly songs. You eat in mess halls and wash dishes every night for hours and hours until your fingers are all pruny. At camp, you swim until your body aches and you're always thirsty. At camp, you stretch your limbs and you look around and everybody looks just like us. At camp, you hold hands and you stay up late and fall asleep peering out from gaps in the slats in the woods so far apart every night is sleeping under the stars. The summer camp movement in the US, we know, drew amply from social anxieties about the effects of urban living on young white men, who who it was feared would lose their masculinity by living in the city's coddled comforts. We thrust the outdoors upon them was the strategy. And when I went to summer camp as a kid, I was at a camp very much in this tradition. We started every morning standing at attention, lining up troop by troop, scout by scout, in military formation around a large flagpole. Stand still, don't scratch, don't sweat, don't swat, don't bristle, or you won't be dismissed to mess hall. At camp, we practiced making fires, coaxing laughter from dying embers. At camp, we learned how to swim and tread water, to run through fields with tall grass, to tell native species from invasive and poisonous ones, and to always drink lots of water. At camp, you play baseball. You duck the barbed wire, you wade deep and wave to the lifeguards high up in their tall towers. At camp, you hang your clothes outside on lines, and the outside comes in, and you make a home on a land whose true name you do not know. Now, closing campfire each year felt like something bubbled up from a primordial broth. Walking into the clearing at the end of the week, I gasped at logs and firewood stacked nearly 40 feet into the air. And after an opening liturgy of very serious vows and creeds, the blaze was lit. I remember feeling like I was living my father's stories then. Here too, the staff clothed themselves in flesh that they imagined extinct. Drums pounding, slathered in brown face paint and polyester feathers, they ran around the fire flailing, yelping with wide eyes, whisking away campers for selection into some secret order of honor and brotherhood. I left dizzy, head full of old ghosts and scout legends, eyes burning with smoke and wonder. If camp is just gloss for cementing our fraudulent ownership of indigenous land, it's only natural that this fiction be garbed in the language of legend. In the gory raiment of sun gods and ravenous spirits, great wolves and glowing shells leading a young man to triumph over the fierce and feminine forces of nature. The Hawaiian people tell the story of the trickster god who stole fire from the alai birds, teaching humankind how to kindle flames of their own, to warm, to cook, to nourish, and to sustain life. The creatures quickly mastered the craft, carrying the fire to other lands, and before long the gift was digitized, distilled, its native origins obscured. Around new campfires, the Promethean gift continued to enchant. But we, their descendants, no longer believed in the old gods. We conjured the blazes on our own, we told ourselves, felled the elder trees with buckles and bootstraps and sheer force of will. Drunk with divine flame, we hewed new deities, ones all our own, conscripting ancient myths to our service. The summer camps that formed me, like many of the camps that held our families, and like my city and state, often bore indigenous names that we once imagined held great power. Chicago, Illinois, the butchered words of butchered peoples, earthy syllables that tasted fibrous and strange in our plastic mouths. As children of settlers, many of us learn only dim histories of the original inhabitants of the places in which we live, catching faint glimpses of their stories amidst an otherwise ascendant curriculum. We don't know the names of the camps, of the Red Summer, of the slaying of Emmett Till, the rupturing neighborhoods into which our families were thrust with decadent malice. And as we spend our lives here on stolen land in cities and in neighborhoods that we do not know, the work remains for us to unmask and unearth what has been hidden from view. We carry the fire within us still, a living memory which may yet immolate the forces of whiteness and death. In a settler society unable to meaningfully envision possibilities beyond the carceral state, ardent calls for abolition may appear to be the summoning to a kind of death. At times, total conflagration, the loss of our bodies, seems a more likely fate than the full decolonization upon which we insist. Yet if we must die, let it not be like animals hemmed into some sordid spot. If we must die, let us risk bad escapes, and let us die free, burning with love of the land, beyond the surveillance cameras and the red lines, far from the projects and the prisons, miles outside the harsh walls of Gaza and Gila River, the wire cages of Tule Lake, California, and 26th in California. An anonymous writer in the Poston concentration camp captured a similar sentiment in a popular poem that once circulated among the campers there. We seek the softness of the midnight air, but that damned fence in the floodlight glare awakens unrest in our nocturnal quest, and mockingly laughs with vicious jest.